Hi, and welcome to my tutorial on clothing simulations. My name is Hans Eriksson, and I'm a certified Maya user. And what I'd like to go through is the best way to do clothing simulations, at least that I found. And I know this is kind of a slideshow here at first, but I encourage you all to take a look at it. Chalk talks sometimes are very, very important. The first thing I'd like to talk about is scene and file management and why this is very important. Simply put, clothing simulations are special effects. And because of that, the files can be extremely complex. These files generally have a very large overhead, and special effect files are generally very memory intensive. Getting cloth simulations to behave consistently as expected can be extremely challenging. So the goals of this tutorial is to demonstrate good organizational skills, and this is going to help in the long run. This will make for easier shot management, which is your ultimate goal, and it also helps to eliminate guesswork. I also want to go over on how to construct simulations that are easy to make changes in a very non-destructive manner, and then how to construct simulations that have a lower memory overhead with quicker render times. And that's always the bottom line. Let's first talk about scene file management in Maya. In my scene folder, and I use the default folder setup that Maya suggests because, quite frankly, it works. Within my scene folder, I set up three basic folders, which are called props, sets, and shots. Basically, my props are parts and pieces. It's just whatever I need to put together to make a set or include in a shot. My sets are maximum assets used in all shots. In other words, what I do is I build a set with everything that would be in a minimum shot. If it's landscape, I put in the landscape. If it's tables or park benches or whatever, that all goes into the set shot. My shots are files ready to render according to the storyboard. And basically what I do is I'll import in a set, add whatever other props that I need to work with, import all of my animation, and then set up my rendering. And those are my shots. But what we're going to talk about here is the character file management that we're going to find in the props folder. The character files in the props folder, and I make a special folder for each character. The first thing I'm going to have is a character base mesh. That's a complete character mesh with clothing, but no rig, but with complete materials and textures. I basically rarely touch this file. It's basically used in case something goes wrong with another file. I have a file that is non-corrupted, and I can rebuild whatever other file that I need from this file. My second one is a skinning mesh. It's a body with a rig, no cloth. I also use it as an animation rig. My animation rig is an exact duplicate of the skinning mesh, and again, it's a body with rig, no cloth. Why do I have both? Well, again, I want one that is protected, and on my skinning mesh, sometimes I'll go ahead and go into that one and maybe change the rig a little bit. But I want to do that in a file that I'm not currently working with, and the one that I'm currently working with is my animation file. The next file, and the one that we're going to be building, is the clothing simulation file. This is a body and clothing with complete materials and textures and the cloth simulation, but has no rig. And I'll get into why that works a little bit later. And lastly, I have my production file. This is basically just a duplicate of the character base mesh, but it's what I'm going to use in all my shots. It again has no rig or no cloth simulation within it. This is a very low overhead file, which will work beautifully within your shots. And I'll go over how that's done in a later tutorial. So what is needed in the clothing simulation file, because that's the file that we're going to be working with the most. The first thing that we're going to need is, of course, the base mesh. This is going to have a complete body modeling. It has to have good UVs, must have a material, but textures are not always mandatory just as yet. Extraneous history has to be deleted. The next thing we're going to have is, in the base mesh, is complete clothing. And there again, we're going to have good UVs, must have materials, but textures are not always mandatory yet. And extraneous history, again, must be deleted. Next, we're going to have animation that is imported as a cache file for all the body geometry. And this is where we're going to get our movement within the within this particular file that we're building. We don't need a rig. We can make our animation in an animation file, export the animation as a cache file, and then import it within here. This makes this file has a little less overhead. So the four parts of our production character file, or I should say clothing sim file, is what I call a beauty body group. This again is the complete body model, which will eventually have all textures and can be changed later. The modeling cannot change, but the materials and textures can, and animation will be imported as a cache file. The next thing we're going to have is a simulation body group. This is going to be a low poly mesh with a simple material, which will wrap to the body and acts as a driver for the cloth. Next, we're going to have the simulation clothing group, which will be a low poly, single layered, and has a simple material. This is attached to the simulation body group and acts as a driver for production clothing. And lastly, we're going to have the beauty clothing group. And this is going to be a complete clothing model, which will eventually have all the textures, which can be changed later, and will wrap to the simulation clothing group, which will drive all its actions. Now this may seem a little complicated and overrated, but I think by the time we get to the end of this or the end of this tutorial, you're going to see the advantages of all of it. So with this, let's go ahead and proceed to the next video where we're actually going to be working in Maya. Thank you.